do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry!
After committing to a rebuild by trading Jimmy Butler, the Chicago Bulls have not been very good. But after making some changes in the front office and on the coaching staff, they might be back on the right track towards contention. What's up, everybody? My name is Ethan. This is Courtside TV. Today we're talking about the Chicago Bulls, and if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Zach LaVine is the Bulls' best player, and he is coming off his best season as a pro, averaging over 25 points per game. He was one of those challengers for the All-Star game in the Eastern Conference. Didn't end up making the cut, but he is certainly a guy who could continue to, push for those bottom-tier All-Star spots in the Eastern Conference over the next couple of years. He's only 25, so he's still young and getting better, and he's got 2 years left on his contract at around $20 million per season. This is a guy who I think it makes sense for the Bulls to keep around. I'm not sure if he can be the number one scorer on a really good team. LaVine seems to be more suited for a second or third scoring option on a really good playoff team, and he can be a guy who can come in and get timely buckets and stuff. I think of him in more of like a Klay Thompson role, or like a Kevin Love, or a guy who is not going to demand the ball too much but can score points and get hot at some points when you need him. That's really his ideal role if we're talking contender status. But for right now, the Bulls, they rely on him to be their lead guy, and he's been pretty good in that role so far for them. Like I said, at only 25 years old, he's still getting better. The only question I have with him is whether or not the Bulls are going to want to keep him, considering that they now have a completely new, coaching staff and an overhauled front office, because they got rid of Jim Boylan. Jim Paxson and Gar Forman are both now in new roles, no longer in their leadership positions in the front office. They've hired, brand new people there. So for a guy like LaVine from a previous regime, people who are in charge, it's like I mentioned with the Kings a couple of weeks ago. The Kings have a new front office, and that might lead to some pretty heavy roster changes. And so I think that could be something that we might see coming to Chicago pretty soon, and if that is the case, then Zach LaVine might be a casualty of that. His contract, like I said, only $20 million, is pretty tradable, and there's certainly a list of contenders out there that would be willing to bring him in, especially to be that third scoring option like I mentioned. And so not necessarily, I don't necessarily see him getting traded this offseason, but if things go poorly for the first half of the year, and maybe, the coaching staff sees a little more of him, and the new front office sees really what they have, they get a full, some more time to evaluate him, then maybe at the deadline they decide, hey, we feel like we can get more assets in return for this guy, and we don't really want him around on the team. We don't want him on this contract. We don't think he can be the leader, whatever. So, maybe we're looking at a move around the deadline for LaVine or next off season. I don't think it'll happen right away. I still think the new front office needs time to kind of settle in and figure out what they really want to do. But I do think LaVine's a good player, and if they do hold on to him, I think he will have a role here as they continue to acquire their young talent and really round out what this team is going to be for the future. But his state and really the whole roster is kind of in limbo right now. So strangely enough, the Bulls have drafted at 7th overall for the past 3 drafts, having Lauri Markkanen and then Wendell Carter and now Coby White, all picked at the 7th overall spot in the first round. And these 3 are all, they're all solid players. It's a little bit too early to know what to make of Coby White, but he turned in a pretty solid rookie year, started to get better and better as the year went on. Wendell Carter has kind of struggled with injury a little bit, but when he's played, he's looked good. And Lauri Markkanen is a little interesting because it seems like he took a big decline last year. Not sure what the reasons for that were. Maybe it was something to do with coaching or just hit a slump for whatever reason. But he wasn't as great last year as he was for the first 2 seasons of his career when he looked pretty promising, and now that has caused his name to kind of be thrown into trade rumors. But we'll have to see if anything comes of that, because Markkanen is now inching closer and closer to that rookie extension that might be coming his way. So we'll have to see, if the Bulls are going to extend him, and if so, for how much, or if they decide they don't want to pay him and put him on the trade market. But as for right now, these 3 are all, solid young pieces for the team. Markkanen is heading into the final year of his rookie deal. Wendell Carter's got 2, and Coby White has 3, of course. And so these are guys who, they fit right into what the Bulls want to do. They all play different positions. They're all pretty, Coby White and Markkanen specifically are great scorers. Carter's pretty good defensively, just an overall solid big man. And all three still have quite a bit of potential and are still very young. So these three, I would imagine, are guys that the Bulls should at least want to hold on to, maybe more so Carter and White, just because they're younger and there's still a lot of potential there. Markkanen, I could maybe justify a move. Just a change of scenery might do him good, but you're going to have to get something pretty solid back for that. I wouldn't sell low on Markkanen. Even if you don't want to pay him, you can always flip him a little bit later, so I wouldn't necessarily rush to do that right now. But this is their young core, these three, along with LaVine, and assuming that White can develop into a solid point guard and Carter can develop into a solid center, and whatever Markkanen becomes, this is a pretty good young core as far as young cores go. I think they've got some talent here. It just remains to be seen exactly what the ceiling is for a lot of these guys, but it does feel pretty promising overall. So now let's look at the cap sheet. And like I mentioned with LaVine, they have a brand new front office in place. I believe Arturas Karnisovas, I think is how you say that. Karnisovas, I believe he worked for the Nuggets before, and he is going to be the new GM. He's coming in to, fix this roster, because you take one look at this and you see a couple of veterans here that don't really fit with the timeline, are overpaid, and contenders could use them. And specifically here, I'm talking about Otto Porter, Thaddeus Young, Tomas Satoransky, and Cristiano Felicio. Porter is got a big player option. He's going to pick that up. That's well more than he'll get on the open market. He was injured for a lot of last year, has been up and down ever since they acquired him from the Wizards, but he's got that player option for $28 million. He's going to pick that up. So can the Bulls find a taker for that? It's going to be hard, because that's a big contract. It isn't expiring, so it's a little easier to move, but you'll be hard-pressed to find a team out there that is going to be desperate to acquire Otto Porter. There's a lot of other guys out there making similar money that are a lot better players than he is, that you can get, for relatively cheap. So Porter, I don't expect there to be a strong trade market for him. I think the Bulls probably just hold on to him and let it expire, and then maybe bring him back on a deal with a lower salary value, because he is a good player. That's just a lot of money for him. And then moving down the list, Thaddeus Young, who I would expect to, be shopped heavily this offseason. He is a guy at 32 years old with 2 years left on that contract. It's a little much for him. He's a good, solid veteran, but at $14 million, that's kind of questionable there. But I would not be surprised to see a contender, take a chance on him, bring him in. I feel like he can contribute on a good team still, and if you can get him for not much, I'm sure that the Bulls are probably just willing to dump that salary if you can just match expiring contracts, whatever. I think they'll probably bite at that. So just getting Young off the books, I think, would be a high order of priority for them. Satoransky, I think less so. He's probably a better player at this point, and he fits a little bit more into what the Bulls want to do. He is kind of eating up some of those point guard minutes and some of those ball handling minutes away from guys like LaVine and White. But Satoransky, he's an okay player, making an even $10 million. That's a very tradable contract as well. He's a solid player, and I would expect contenders to also be interested. Similarly to Young, he probably has a little bit more value. You could maybe squeeze, a late pick out of that or something, but we'll have to see if they can get anything. And then Cristiano Felicio is not very good at basketball. He's making $7.5 million to basically ride the end of the bench. He doesn't play much, and if he did, he wouldn't be very good. So that's only going to be used in the event of you need to throw that in for salary matching, or maybe a buyout at the deadline. Would not be surprising at all, and he could maybe go sign on a veteran minimum somewhere, if that. But I would not be surprised to see the Bulls try to clear that salary any way they can, but you're not going to get anything back for it. It's if you can clear the salary, great. If not, just let it expire and move on. And so now let's talk about some of their free agents for the offseason. They only have a few. Most of their guys are coming back. All those veterans are re-signed for next year, and then most of their young core is still on their rookie deal, so they've got, a couple of years left before they really have to pay anybody. But Chris Dunn, who, is an expiring contract, 26 years old, and he is a restricted free agent. So, does it make sense for the Bulls to bring him back? I'm kind of split on it. He's, really, really good defensively, one of the premier defensive guards in the league. But he can't really hit a shot to save his life. Not a great playmaker. The upside there is really, only his defense. And so I could see a lot of contenders being interested, but what is the price tag on that? I don't know. As a restricted free agent, he'll definitely get more than the minimum deal, because if any other team offers the minimum, it's worth it for Chicago to, bring him back on that. Really, probably anything about what he's making right now, $5-6 million a season, I would say it's worth it for Chicago to match. But if another team really likes him and wants to try to pry him away, you can offer a higher annual salary value that the Bulls probably won't be willing to match. And if you go, in my opinion, like $9-10 million a year, I think the Bulls should probably just let that one go. I don't think it's quite worth it. But if you can get him on a fair deal, I think, it's not a terrible idea to bring him back. And then you can always flip it down the line, of course, because contracts in that range are very tradable, especially for a guy like Chris Dunn, who is a good basketball player, just a little bit limited on the offensive end, but his impact on defense kind of makes up for that. Denzel Valentine and Shaquille Harrison are both still relatively young, but I don't think either of them are going to be super high priorities for the Bulls. They kind of have worn out their potential, specifically Valentine. I think we kind of know what type of player he is at this point, and that's, an end of the bench guy. Maybe he could be in the 10-man rotation on a good team, but I don't necessarily see the Bulls being too motivated to bring him back. Similar deal with Shaq Harrison as well. He might be an end of the bench guy, or maybe his career's over. Who knows? So that's pretty much it for their free agency. I think, shop around a couple of those veterans, specifically Young and Satoransky, see what you can get for them. And Otto Porter as well. If there's an offer there probably won't be. And I would wait on trading Zach LaVine, like I mentioned earlier, and then, getting Chris Dunn back on a fair deal if you can. If not, then just, wipe your hands and say, we're done, let it go. I do anticipate there to be some pretty heavy roster turnover from those veterans that I mentioned, just because of the new front office. They'll likely keep a lot of these young pieces, but Young and Satoransky and Porter, and even Felicio, if they can find a taker, those guys are all going to be on the trade block if they can find takers for them. And then the Bulls as well have the 4th overall pick in this year's draft, and that's going to be a pretty interesting selection because, you're not quite sure who's going to be available there. There's been a lot of smoke screening going on at the top of the draft. We know that the top 2 teams might be interested in trading down. Maybe the Bulls are one of those teams who is interested in trading up. And so, they're not really sure what their options are. I'm sure that they've planned it all out and everything, but let me give you a couple of scenarios for the Bulls on draft night. Number 1, I think they need another wing. They have Coby White locked in at point guard. They have Wendell Carter at center. Not necessarily that, this team needs to be drafting for fit, because generally I advise teams at the top of the draft not to necessarily draft for fit, just because they don't have a ton of talent and whatever. But I do feel like they need another wing on this roster, and that's probably going to be some of the players available for them at 4 are likely going to be wings anyway, and those are going to be the best players at that position. So somebody like Isaac Okoro, if he's there, I really like Isaac Okoro for the Bulls. If they can get their hands on him. He's versatile, good defensively. The shot might come around eventually. Hard worker, knows how to win. Similar deal with Denny Avdia. He's a good team defender. Again, with him, the shot is a little bit suspect, but he's really, really good playmaking-wise. He can set up a lot of your other guys for open shots, and I think he would develop well there. And so if you're thinking of fits there, I think those 2 are really some of your best options. I've seen a lot of people talk about LaMelo Ball. I don't necessarily like LaMelo as much for them, just because LaMelo would likely demand the ball a lot, and that's taking away touches from White and LaVine, who you probably want to give them the majority of your offense, rather than LaMelo. So I like wings for them at that 4 spot. Maybe even a guy like Devin Vassell or Halliburton or whoever you think is the best option for you at 4. I could see them maybe wanting to trade up to select a guy like Anthony Edwards if they feel like he's the best player in the draft. If you can get up to 1 or 2, depending on what Minnesota does at 1, maybe you can get up to 2 with Golden State and see if you can pick Edwards there if he doesn't go first. There's a lot of options for him. But that 4th overall pick is going to be one of the more interesting spots in the draft because I really could see it going either way. The Bulls staying there and picking whoever they think is the best. They could even trade up or trade down. I think all of those options are in play for Chicago. So, draft night is going to be really, really exciting, and we will just have to see. But other than that, draft a wing, find trades specifically for Thaddeus Young and Tomas Satoransky, and then just continue to develop that young talent and hold on to your stuff, hold on to your young pieces. And then I think the hiring of Billy Donovan was probably a pretty good move, honestly. I think he turned in a pretty solid year with Oklahoma City. I'd been critical of him in the past. I didn't feel like he was great at maximizing the stars that he had, specifically the Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook years. I felt like those teams never really hit their ceiling. But that last year with the Thunder was really a collection of a bunch of role players. You had Chris Paul and then a lot of guys who were solid, bench, solid starter guys, but no other stars. And he really maximized that team and took them to the next level. So maybe he can do something similar here with Chicago. They have a lot of talent. A lot of it is still young and raw and developing. But I do think they can be a contender for the playoffs in the East if they nail this draft and they can get, something decent back for a couple of their veterans. And even if it's not this year, allowing Coby White and Wendell Carter a couple more years to develop, and then whoever you pick it for this year also, in 2 or 3 years, they could really be a pretty solid team depending on the trajectory of some of these guys. It doesn't really look like they have a true superstar on the roster, which is, something that you're going to want to have if you want to be contending for titles. So maybe that's whoever you pick this year, or eventually you can cash in some of these assets for a really, a good guy. And Chicago is a pretty big market, so there's always the chance they sign somebody in free agency. And that is all I have for you today. My thoughts on the Chicago Bulls. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. We'll be back tomorrow with the Charlotte Hornets on Friday, and then we're continuing to wrap up all the rest of the teams after this video. There's only 3 left before the NBA draft, so that's exciting, and I will see you guys tomorrow.